Boy, 20 years can go by fast, can it? Yeah, it sure can. If you're young, you'll find that out later. Enjoy. But such was the case for Doctor Who with the 5 Doctors. So you got to celebrate that, and that's what they did. So with all things, there's good and bad, and a lot of the bad was unavoidable. There was it's not really there's people to blame, but I think it would have been much better had this been spread out over chapters, but they probably didn't have the time or the budget for it. I don't know. I've since then have seen that there were other ideas about different plots that would have happened, and some of those sounded a little more expensive, and I would have thought would have required an episodic adventure and that sort of thing. But special's what they got, and so they make it work for what it is. And the death zone's supposed to be this big deal, And they're walking around, and that's about it. And then, really, the Cybermen are the only one to spruce up the place. They get one dialect, and that's about it. But thank God for Earthshock, because those Cybermen suits were readily available, so they can make use of that stuff, and that worked out. Even now, I still think of Peter Davison's era of Cybermen are the absolute best depiction of them. But anyway, so that's one of the bright spots of it. And of course, the cool thing, the other Doctors, and this was at the time my first introduction to Pertwee and Troughton. I'd only seen little bits and pieces here with clips and whatnot, and then there were these specials over all the history of Doctor Who at the time, and I got to see that and all that. But the big disappointment, of course, is Tom Baker backed out. Now, at the time, I think he was still miffed with the people involved, and it didn't really end well when he left and all that type of stuff. And then apparently there was at least on his perception of it, that there were promises of other options and roles and stuff that would be forthcoming. I think since that time he had done the Sherlock Holmes series and all that. But after that was probably about it. I don't know. But anyway, initially he seemed all gung-ho for this whole long-winded story, and that his Doctor would have had a lot more to do. Now, there were different plots where the Master would have been the main villain and all this stuff, and they dropped that. He's still in it, but nevertheless, different versions of how things would go. And the 4th Doctor was going to have a more prominent role in it. Apparently, a lot of the scenes that Peter Davison does was actually going to be the 4th Doctor, I guess, and finding Barusa and all that sort of stuff. But anyway, it didn't turn out that way, and in the end, he backs out, which even now he admits he really regrets that he did that. He should have shown up and done it. Apparently, one of his stumbling things is I didn't want to just be one of many Doctors. Well, that's the point of the show, Tom. So it's sad that it didn't work out. As it happens, of course, they had the Shaddai episode, which didn't get completed until now, of course, with the animated parts. But although I do like the Paul McGann teaming up with Lalla Ward audio thing they did, that was kind of cool. But whatevs. Alternate timeline, I guess now. So they had that where he gets captured, and oh no, the scoop, the time scoop broke down, and well, that's to be expected. Apparently that's Rassilon's technology, I guess, and it'd been sitting there for a while. So a lot of this was prepared for somewhat. There's threads leading certainly to Arc of Infinity, and all of which features Omega, who was the villain from the previous gathering of the Doctors, which, of course, sadly, because of William Hartnell's failing health, he could only make a brief cameo in it. So it was basically really more the 2 Doctors. And here we have more the 4 Doctors because, Baker being Baker. And then sadly, Hartnell had passed away since then. So Richard Herndal, played the role, and who I think passed away himself not long after this production was completed. So So anyway, they get together. And so there's some elements there, especially with the Time Lords involved, and the Time Lord that's framed by Barusa and all this. It would have been interesting had there been more to that, and that Barusa had been plotting something, because he always came across as a behind-the-scenes type of guy, and then there he was. Eventually, there was no one left to be the Lord President, so he's the Lord President. And the plot was that he wanted to continue and all that stuff. And then it's just, well, he's lusting for power and he's become corrupt, and then I guess you can just sort of conclude that his latest regeneration went wrong or something like that, which is not a bad conclusion, that it kind of, he went a little nutty on that, but that his ambitions might have had more development to it. Now, years later, I thought this was a character they could have revisited, certainly with Time War and everything, and that was his motivation, that he knew the Time War was coming, and he was looking for means by which to prevent it. I always thought it would have been cool had he been the Time Lord that sent the Doctor back to Skaro and Genesis of Daleks, and because he knows what's coming. I think I don't know, I haven't listened to any of the Big Finish Time War episodes, but I've read a few things about him, and apparently they've said that that's actually a Time Lord from the future, from the Time War, that went and did that. I don't know. I thought that the Genesis of the Daleks was kind of like what starts the whole thing in the first place. But anyway, I mean, it starts the Daleks, of course, but I mean the Time War and all that. But that could have been more of his motivation, and that he was obsessive about it, and that this was someone who was always manipulating the Doctor from time to time, making use of the Doctor as an agent to do the things he couldn't because he was, back on Gallifrey and running things from behind the scenes and all that. I think Barusa is kind of a missed opportunity here and there. But, what are you going to do? Some things don't quite fit. So we have probably the biggest one is the second Doctor. Now, he shows up and goes to visit the Brigadier. Now, the Brigadier, they've depicted this as taken in between years, I suppose, or perhaps before that, with the modern undead episode where you had the two Brigadiers. And this is at the moment that he's retiring from the service and all that, and they're having a little get-together with his successor over unit and all that sort of stuff. And they make mention, no, we couldn't contact the Doctor and all that. And then here comes the second Doctor. This is the first Doctor that Brigadier's ever met. And he's like, oh my God, it's you, And he said, yeah. And he talks about, I shouldn't be here. I'm kind of breaking the laws of time or something, just wanted to come visit and all that. And they get abducted to go be in the death zone and all that. But the problem here is at what point in the Doctor's timeline is this second Doctor? He shows up to visit with the Brigadier because this is the Brigadier's little retirement ceremony. Now, the second Doctor got to know the Brigadier. He had 2 adventures with him, and and so a bit of a more of an associate, than a full-blown friend just yet. And so he was aware of him, liked the guy and all that sort of stuff, so that when the third Doctor arrives, and that's when the real relationship begins. That's when the real friend. So I would have thought that, of course, this might have been because Tom Baker wasn't in it. They might have paired Tom Baker with Sarah Jane rather than Pertwee, and that Pertwee and Brigadier could, and then probably Fraser Hines was there. He does a cameo, but he could have been the main companion, and perhaps even Zoe with Troughton's Doctor, because again, this creates a problem. So these 2 phantom versions of Zoe and Fraser show up in a trap for the second Doctor. But then the second Doctor says, wait a minute, you guys don't know who I am. The Time Lords erased your memories and all this stuff. And so that's how he figures it out. Although they erased most of the memories, they do remember meeting him and having their first adventure. That's how they left it. But they erased all their memories of traveling with him after the fact. So they wouldn't have known each other. but at the same time, it's like, well, how are you here? Now, I know there's been, before he regenerated, wait a minute, we need to use you on some missions. And so he's sent off on these missions, and that's supposed to explain the Two Doctors episode later on that Colin Baker has with him. And Jamie's there, and Troughton, I guess, decided not to dye his hair for the episode. So he said, he's in mid transition to Pertwee. I don't know. And when did this happen? Why would it happen? Because, at the end of War Games, that's it. He's changing. It's done. The sentence been passed. And the next thing you see, it's Pertwee in Troughton's suit, the clothes and everything. So there's no real indication that anything that much happened in between. It gets a bit silly to do that. It's a misstep. That's, and it's kind of interesting and obviously for what it is, but there's things like the rest of it for the course of Peter Davison's era here. They'd set up things with the Time Lords and Barusa and all that. So it kind of narratively works on that part. But this, not so much. As for Pertwee, it just sort of fits. He's riding around in Bessie. That was a good touch, And he and the car, which I don't know what became of the car. I guess we'll pick it up later, because it insinuates that he's just riding around the road in his era, and he runs into Sarah Jane. He knows her, so you can chalk it up that this took place at some point in the time that he was with her. But at this point, he was just taking a little leisurely drive, and all of a sudden the scoop shows up. And so he's like, hey, Sarah Jane, And of course, she's from a future time where but you regenerated, and he says, well, I haven't yet. And so it just works, As for Susan and the Doctor, Susan appears to be obviously from a future time. I don't know if it worked out with the boyfriend and everything. And the Doctor, I don't know. He's just walking around somewhere. There's not a whole lot of information there on that, and which is probably just as well. So there's not too much messing with it. But the second Doctor, that's a problem. I don't know. I just don't know why they did it like that. I guess you definitely want Sarah Jane in there. Like I've said, she's pretty much the quintessential Doctor Who companion. And without Tom Baker there, I'm guessing that kind of maybe I can't remember. I've read articles on this about what the original plans were and stuff like that, and so perhaps that's what that would have been. She would have been paired with Baker, or they could have paired her with Davidson, And Tegan ends up with the first Doctor and all that stuff. I don't know. It just didn't work out. But there's cool scenes there with Pertwee meeting the current Master. And it takes him a while to recognize him because, it's not quite a regeneration, but something like that. And stuff like that. And there's a little nod and a mention with the Master. The first Doctor meets him, is not quite sure who he is. And he says, believe it or not, we were in the academy together. And so that more establishes the long history that the two have had and all that sort of thing. And so that's all cool stuff. Of course, you can write it off. Well, Pertwee managed to recognize him because he's, he figures it out that it's the Master. This business, the Time Lords can recognize each other. But in the case of the Master being in the stolen body rather than a new version of his own, you could understand why there's some difficulty there. And certainly with Hartnell, it's not Hartnell, the first Doctor, rather. And yes, the first Doctor doesn't quite recognize him either. But there again, he says, he's not really in his original body anymore. So, it works out. So there you go. You have this basic adventure where they have to get there to the Tower of Rassilon. This presents interesting things about what's become of Rassilon since then. But again, showing that he's this very powerful Time Lord. So you have to wonder, I'm guessing we're going with what the second Doctor talks about to the Brigadier. He talks about him and the Brigadier. So I thought he was supposed to be the good guy. He says, well, that's the official record, but there's legends to the contrary. Well, now we know those legends are probably more true than not. At least it was until somebody came in and just burnt down the whole canon and rewrote it and doesn't even mention the guy. But anyway, so it seems more than likely that that version of it you'd have to conclude is true, because there he is. His body is inside this tower, and but then this vision of him appears that appears to be his, I don't know, projection of himself, speaking of which that's established as well, that some Time Lords can do that, which also establishes there's other Time Lords who are far more powerful than the Doctor. You know, so that's why you don't make it Dr. God, you keep it being Doctor Who. But anyway, and so I was wondering if that was an AI version of him for the trap, that ultimately that was the plot, that Barusa is seeking immortality, that Rassilon had achieved perpetual regeneration, and which does sound like something a villain would do. So there again, more credence that the guy was not all the only up and up. But the trap being to get rid of other people pursuing immortality for the pursuance of power and all of that sort of thing. Probably more for Rassilon not to have any rivals, but in this case, it's sort of used in a continuance of that should anyone seek out the means by which to achieve immortality. So that's how it goes. And of course, they have it where the first Doctor is the one who figures out what it is. Barusa goes in there and gets turned into a stone statue, ornament, as it were, and spends his immortality like that, trapped in the crypt of Rassilon. And so they show the scenes where there's other Time Lords have tried as you, and and they're also like, oh grab, and yeah, it's too late, you're stuck. Well, with the Time War, and since Rassilon himself was revived and brought back, and then the Master was resurrected, they actually say they resurrected him and all this, gave him the ability to regenerate and all this stuff. That's another thing, because this is another thing that's very important for continuity purposes, because the Master is recruited by the Time Lords to go in there and rescue the Doctor and figure out what's going on. And so, but why would he do that? Well, they offer him a new regeneration cycle. They say a complete new regeneration cycle. Does it really mean 12 regenerations? Or I would have put the stipulation that this is the best they can do. You might get, I don't know, 4 to 6, maybe halfway with 6. That's the best they can do, because otherwise the whole plot falls apart. Because Barusa, if he's able to do this for the Master, why doesn't he just do it for himself and continue on? Because that is immortality. So I think it needed to be stipulated that, yeah, it's only a handful of regenerations you get, but it's better than the nothing you have now. And of course, the Master was constantly pursuing this. He tried it first with the Eye of Harmony, and you have to conclude that he had some amount of success, and especially since he's not as emaciated in Traken as he was in Deadly Assassin. But that then he's with the Keeper of Traken and get the powers and that sort of thing to achieve. He was going to steal the Doctor's body so he could take on the Doctor's remaining regenerations and all that. And so he ends up having to steal Tree Master's body and stuff like that. But that was one of the main things he wanted the power for. So he's trying to figure out how to maintain his existence, because he's burned through all these regenerations and stuff. So it's a major plot point and motive for the Master. That's, it's a good one. It's strong. But it does create a problem here, plot-wise. So the only way to fix that, I would think, is that it's limited. You can only have, a few, and it really should have been established. But it just isn't. Later on, where the Doctor gets new regenerations from the Time Lords, because he's at the end, which we now know he really wasn't. Yeah, it's terrible. But anyway, he does that, and then he confronts Rassilon, and Rassilon says, how many regenerations did we give you? Because he was just going to keep killing him till he ran out. So yeah, that's kind of a nudge, but it doesn't really specify how many. How many does he have to go on? At the moment, I guess the Doctor doesn't really know, although with the idiocy of the timeless child is that's forever. There is a means by which you could have had the Doctor achieve this without really wanting to. And that's why I come back. Of course, it's my own idea, but that Borusa is a character that could have been revived for the Time War because they were desperate. They were so desperate they went after the Master and revived him. All this whatever to throw everything they've got at the threat of the Daleks. And at some point, if they're waking up Rassilon, then Borusa and those other Time Lords are released. Put into the service of figuring out how do you wipe out the Daleks and all this sort of stuff. And at some point or another, I thought there might have been this means by which you could combine certain stories that had already happened. Omega would be one they'd want to bring back in, but that's difficult because of the state of antimatter and all of that. But it was a curious thing about the Arc of Infinity, about Omega bonding with the Doctor and all that. So then I thought you could have contrived a story by which either Omega or Borusa, but with Borusa, it's more significant in the sense that once he's released from that crypt, keep in mind, he's immortal now. He's like Rassilon. He will regenerate forever. And at some point, you can contrive a way where he has to bond with the Doctor. And this could have been a contrived way where the Doctor has given up on the war. He wants nothing to do with it, and they need him. They manipulate him in a situation where he's bonded with Borusa, so that you create this entity that's both the Doctor and Borusa, and the Doctor thinks he's in charge of his faculties, but he's not quite. And that's what I thought could have been an explanation for the War Doctor. It's the Doctor, but it's still kind of the Eighth Doctor still there bonded with this other Time Lord in the case of Borusa. Once that's over and the War Doctor's hurt or whatever, the regeneration you have, they split into two. Ninth Doctor's on the floor, unconscious. Borusa goes away, in his own way, having realized that he's achieved his goal, whatever it was, or maybe not. I mean, it didn't end well at the time until they fix it later, and disappears off into the ether or what have you, in a new body. And the regeneration causes them to split. And that could be the means by which you do that. The point of it is that once that bonding happened, the Doctor now has perpetual regeneration, just like Borusa did. And so there you go. So now the lineup of the Doctors works. You have an immortal Doctor through no means of his own. He did not pursue this to achieve it or whatnot. And there you go. So, however, if the Doctor were to refuse to regenerate, could he die? Since the Master did that to himself, we had a backup plan, but so would that work? Yeah, I think so. And that could be the means by why did they have to blast Matt Smith's Doctor with the boost? Because he didn't realize he could. I guess if he had passed out from exhaustion, maybe his body would have automatically done it and he'd wake up, what the hell? But, that's the deal. So there's these things here that could have been utilized but weren't, and it's unfortunate, but that's where it is. But as for the Five Doctors, you did get this good romp, but there's so many things like this within it that suggest this or that and all that, and it's never really solidified. It's never really dealt with. I understand about keeping the Doctor's origins mysterious, which I would have done that, which now that's all done away with. But the aspects of regeneration, so that's not harmful to the narrative to explain that and make the rules, and you need to when you're going on beyond the 12 and all that. So there's a lot there within Arc of Infinity and the Five Doctors that I think is rather significant elements there, with the offer to the Master, the Rassilon's immortality, and and all that, what happens to Bruce and all that. So yeah, there's cool aspects of it. There's things within the Five Doctors that, but it's what they had to work with. And, overall, it's a good little romp, but it has its problems in it. And the primary ones is probably the Second Doctor's continuity details here that are a bit troublesome. But I guess you got to go with, what was it, the Celestial Intervention Agency? that they're the ones who recruited him. I don't know, that they came in and froze time from the tribunal and said, we need him for a minute. Stop. Well, why not just send the regenerated doctor out there? I know that's one of the theories for Dr. Ruth, was who they sent. Yeah. Well, I guess it's better than being pre-heart now. So, yeah. No, either she's an alternate timeline doctor or she's from the future. It's the only way that works. Anyway. So yeah, there's holes here that are really unnecessary. But my guess is because Baker didn't show up. They had to swap around companions, because I thought the Brigadier and John Pertwee would have been a better pairing based on the relationship there. And of course, Troughton should have had Jamie at least. And then if Baker had shown up, it would have been him and Sarah Jane, I think. So anyway. There we are. And another sweet moment that should come up a lot more than that. But when the first Doctor gets into the TARDIS and meets up with Peter Davison, who's been suffering from all his other cells being abducted, and then he introduces Susan, and of course. The fifth, yes, I know. And it's a very emotional response. It's very good on Peter Davison, because it makes perfect sense. After all this time, he gets to see his granddaughter. And he finally gets to see her again. It's brief, all too brief, considering the significance of it. And, Susan's another mystery that I guess maybe, and after everything else, I guess it's best to just never be solved. But it's a nice, cool moment. So there's plenty of stuff like that, and it's appropriate for a special like this celebrating Doctor Who. But the sad thing is, little did we know that the hour was nigh, because Doctor Who was already in trouble at the time, and the clock was ticking after that. But Peter Davison, I think, got the best of the 80s Doctor Who, and this was a cool celebration and romp, despite whatever flaws might be in it. It's still a pretty good little adventure for the Doctor. Thanks for watching and listening. Say, while you're still here, why not like and subscribe and share with your many friends? Yes. Also, check out my mini stores in the link description below. Yes, where you can get t-shirts, hats, mugs, all those goodies with my artwork on them. Oh, yeah. And head over to indieplanet.com and pick up a copy of my comic book, Night Night. Oh, yeah. You can also catch me at my podcast, Mr Nailsin Show, on RadioMisfits.com. And you can also watch my videos on BitChute.com and now on Rumble.com. Oh, my goodness, so many places to watch me and my stuff. Oh, yeah. And if that's not enough for you, well, you can follow me on many social media platforms and say hi to your old pal, Mr. Nailsin.